find the calm after the storms.
Thank you, Jean Marie. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me here today to talk about finding the calm after the storm, or in this case, the storms. And I just want to start off by repeating the quote that you see there, that you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. So I just want to remind everybody that we're a lot more resilient than we realize at times. And just to keep that in mind as you weather the aftermath of the things that have been happening. In this webinar, we are going to talk a little bit about overall trauma, as well as the trauma and traumatic stress that some of you maybe all of you have experienced after these last two storms, and some of the issues that occurred prior to it as well. So that being said, let's get started. So, we have been, our community has been hit very hard recently with these two hurricanes that have brought out a multitude of both physical and emotional reactions to all of those impacted. And I just want to remind everyone that we all do respond very differently to trauma and stress. So it's important that we recognize that each individual has their own path of healing and recovery, and that you keep reminding yourself of that and not to compare yourself to others and how they are coping. All right, let's move on to talking about what is trauma. So, trauma is an individual's emotional response to a distressing experience. It can be sudden and it can be very unpredictable. It involves both physical or emotional threat, or in this case, in any case, a perceived threat. So what that means is that there may not have been an actual threat, but it was perceived as being threatening. So that's an important part that a lot of people do miss, and they ask themselves, like, why am I feeling like I have been traumatized here? And that's why. It also undermines our sense of safety. And that's a big piece of this, and a big piece of what our community and many of you on here have gone through recently. And I do want to just say that not everyone who experiences a stressful event or an adverse event will necessarily develop trauma symptoms. So, again, everybody is different. So, what is traumatic stress? So, traumatic stress is a specific type of stress that is related to exposure to traumatic events. And when we think about what we've all been through in the last few weeks, it's easy to recognize that people might be experiencing a lot of stress related to these, not only just the impact of the storms, the aftermath of it, but even just the anxiety that people experienced as we were waiting for them to come. So, traumatic stress is defined as the emotional, cognitive, behavioral, physiological experience of individuals who are exposed to or who witness events that overwhelm their coping and problem solving abilities. So, a key component here also is who witness. So, maybe as we went through these storms, maybe in the aftermath, you did not experience significant losses, but you saw the devastation around you. That in itself can also create a lot of traumatic stress for people. I did want to bring us back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I do believe that this has been significantly impacted by our recent events. So when we look at the triangle here of Maslow's needs, and we look at the very bottom, people are motivated to fulfill these basic needs before moving on to other more advanced needs. So if we look at the bottom needs, the physiological need and the need for safety and security, these are the needs that have been impacted by our recent events and these storms and these hurricanes. So, a lot of people, and maybe many of you on here, and I'm so sorry for that, have, lost housing and have lost the ability to, be in your home, or, your jobs have been impacted, your family, your property, you know, your belongings. So as we are trying to fulfill those basic needs, we are unable to then focus on those higher level needs, the need for love and belonging, self esteem, and self actualization. Those needs are much higher level and cannot even be focused on if our basic physiological and safety and security needs are not met. So I think what happened with this recent storm is a lot of people were forced to focus on those bottom two needs, which really puts us in survival mode. So we're not able to be thriving and self-actualizing and really working on self-awareness or using our full talents and potentials when our basic physiological and safety and security needs are not being met. So, what are some different types of traumatic experiences that can create a trauma response or traumatic stress response? Up here is a listing of many of them. I do have highlighted natural disasters because that is where we are right now, in the aftermath of both Helene and Milton. So, but there are other experiences that can cause us to have a traumatic response, including bullying, harassment, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, sexual or physical assault, sudden loss of a loved one, life threatening illnesses, traffic accidents, kidnapping, acts of terrorism, as we said, natural disaster, combat, community violence, and domestic violence. A lot of people don't realize that life threatening illnesses can also cause people to have traumatic stress, but it's important to remember that people who do get those types of diagnoses experience significant emotional distress, and they also have a lot of changes and loss and uncertainty in their life as well. So what is the response that we may have to trauma? So it's psychological distress that follows the exposure to a traumatic or stressful event. And that distress can be quite variable. So those symptoms can range anywhere from very mild to very severe. Some of the factors that influence how we respond to stress and adverse incidents include our personality, what kind of personality characteristics we might have, our current mental health condition. So, if we are already experiencing some anxiety or depression, then we're now going to add this adverse event or trauma to that. It's going to make it even more difficult for us. Excuse me, prior exposure to traumatic events. So if we have had one event in the past and then we add our current events to it, that in itself can cause complex trauma response. Type and the characteristic of the event. In other words, was it short term, long term? Is it continuing? Those types of things. Our natural coping skills, because we all do have natural coping skills, our ability to be resilient, which can start back in our childhood and grow as we get older, and our support system. And I can't stress enough how important support is when it comes to, most anything in life. So let's talk a little bit about the stress continuum. And I challenge you to take a look at this and see where you might fall on this continuum. So we're going to start to the left, and we're going to talk about thriving. And this is where we're functioning to our optimal ability. So this is where we're saying to ourselves, "I've got this." Where we're adapting and growing, where we're feeling good about our overall well-being, and where we feel motivated to get up every day, to go through the steps of life every day. Then when we move to the next side, to the right of that, we move into the surviving. So now we're going down into more stressful positions in our life. So in surviving, we start to recognize that something just isn't right. So we might start feeling like some temporary distress, maybe a little irritable, anxious, maybe a little sadness. Physically, we might start to feel tension in our muscles, like especially in that neck and shoulder area where we tend to carry a lot of stress. And we may find that we're just not able to focus as much as well as we usually do. And then to the right of that is moving into that struggling phase, where this is where we feel like, oh, we just can't keep up with it. It's becoming more intense. The distress is ongoing. We might start to feel a little bit of loss of control, and we certainly don't feel like our normal self. We might even start to engage in some negative thinking, and our overall feeling is just of being overwhelmed. And then finally, that last piece in the continuum is the in crisis phase. And this is the phase where we really need to reach out and maybe get some professional help. This is where we may say to ourselves, I just don't know if I can survive this. It's becoming so distressful. It's severe. The distress is ongoing. We may start to have difficulty functioning. We may even feel hopeless, and we could then start to develop mental health conditions like depression or anxiety. Maybe we're in burnout. Usually sleep is disrupted. We may have insomnia. And sometimes people then also start to engage in increased use of substances. So take a minute to just look at this and see, where are you? Ask yourself that question. Where are you in this stress continuum right now? You've just been through a few weeks of pretty significant stress. So where do you think you fall? Now, what I'm going to do is go through some different types of reactions to these abnormal situations. And I want you to really listen and look at this and really see, what do you have? What are you experiencing right now? And to remind yourself that no, these are normal reactions to abnormal situations. What we have been through with these two hurricanes, one after another, is not something that normally happens. It's a very abnormal situation. No one really went into this expecting the kind of disruption and damage that we got from Helene, let alone have it followed then by Milton. So it's a very abnormal situation. But these types of reactions, these types of responses that we're going to look at right now are very normal. And know that this isn't comprehensive. Everyone's reactions to things are different. So you may or may not have these emotional, physical, and so on reactions. But look at them, take a look at them and see and ask yourself, am I experiencing this or am I not? So when we look at the emotional side, it's not uncommon to feel fear. What happens if this happens again? I don't know if I can take it anymore. Worry, anxiety, irritability, grief. Many of our community has experienced some significant loss of property and, um, their sense of safety. Anger is not uncommon. Why did this have to happen? Depression, hopelessness, lack of pleasure or interest in things that you used to enjoy. It's what we call anhedonia. It's like, for example, you used to like to go fishing, and then you go fishing because you think, well, I'm going to try to relieve some of this stress, but you're not enjoying it at all. So you're just going through the motions. You're not really enjoying it. One of the normal reactions that I didn't put up there is guilt. And the reason I didn't put that up there is because I wanted to talk a little bit more about it. It's not uncommon for someone to experience survivor guilt in these cases, which is the experience of psychological distress due to surviving a situation relatively unharmed as compared to others. So, in this case, if you happen to be one of those people that didn't experience devastation to your home, but the people around you did, you might be carrying around some guilt about that. So it would be related to having little damage or loss or fallback while those all around you have. These disasters are arbitrary, like nobody really expected this. So they can significantly impact one's family home, while leaving another one, maybe even nearby, relatively unscathed. So people experiencing survivor guilt because of this may experience it in the same way that they would experience any other form of guilt. When I was in private practice, I used to tell people, guilt is not a bad thing. It just tells you that you're a good person, right? You wouldn't feel guilt if you weren't a good person. What we have to be careful about is how we let that guilt impact our lives. So, for example, if you were one of those people that just, feels like, oh my, all these people, my friends, my family, were really negatively impacted and I wasn't. So I'm going to go out and do whatever it is I can do to help. anybody who's been touched by this disaster. But the more you do, the more you feel like it's not enough. It's not enough. So you just wear yourself to the ground trying to alleviate that guilt by helping and helping and helping to the point where you're not taking care of yourself. um, that's what I mean by how it's impacting your life in a negative way. Or maybe you just withdraw from others because you feel guilty. And again, that's not very helpful for you or anyone else. These are not healthy responses. We often hear about survivor guilt with individuals in combat, but it can also occur for other reasons. The best thing to keep in mind is that guilt is a normal reaction to surviving a disaster that may have impacted many lives. Understanding that is a crucial first step to moving past these feelings. We can use the coping skills that we will discuss in this presentation to move through this guilt. But if it remains and grows, then I encourage you to please seek professional help, as it is likely triggering some guilt from past events in your life. Another area is the physical reactions to the abnormal situation. Again, not a comprehensive list, but it isn't uncommon for people to have stomach or GI issues, to have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, or even the opposite, not wanting to get out of bed, or not being able to eat because I have no appetite, or just eating like stress eating. It's not uncommon to have headaches. And when people become stressed and they don't realize that they're having that kind of a reaction, or they feel like they're doing okay when they're not really, how they're going to really see it is physical. And it's easy to focus on it as being just, quote, physical, but in reality, our emotional and our physical well being are very, very connected. So, and if we don't deal with our emotional well being, we will see it in a physical ramification. Another area is behavioral. What kinds of behaviors are we engaging in as we react to these abnormal situations? For example, avoidance. I'm just going to avoid the whole situation, pretend it didn't happen, or I'm going to avoid talking about it, or I'm going to isolate from others, or maybe I'm going to start using drugs or drinking more. We did see this a lot with COVID. With COVID, there was a lot of increased use of alcohol because people were in their homes and they were fearful and anxious, and they were using it as an dysfunctional way of coping. So we want to be very careful to make sure that we aren't doing that. It's also not uncommon to have anger outbursts or to stop taking care of yourself. So ask yourself, are you experiencing or doing any of these things at this point? And then finally, we're going to look at the cognitive side of it. Um, and again, normal reaction to abnormal situations. Are we having intrusive thoughts? Do we have thoughts that just kind of intrude on us? Sometimes even visual images that intrude, like as we're trying to do something. And as a result, we could have a very difficult time concentrating and focusing, maybe even memory issues. So a lot of people will say, "Oh, I feel like maybe I'm getting early dementia." And I'll say to them, "Well, how's your sleep been?" And the answer is, "Oh gosh, I haven't been sleeping at all." Well, let's try an experiment here. Let's try to figure out a way where you can have a few nights of good sleep, and then let's take a look at your memory again. And 99% of the time, after a few nights of healthy, good sleep, a person's memory is back to normal. So people don't realize that there's a very strong correlation between sleep and memory. So keep that in the back of your mind if you start to feel like you just can't remember things. We're spending so much of our emotional energy trying to cope that it's really hard to have a whole lot left to function. And the other thing that we may start to do is just twisting everything to the negative. Maybe we're seeing everything as negative. Again, not it's a normal reaction, but we want to make sure that we don't get stuck there. So ask yourself, as we went through all of these four areas, are you experiencing any of these? And how is it impacting your life at this time? Now, we may notice some changes in other people. And it's important that we pay attention to, our loved ones experiencing more distress than we realize, maybe our friends. So a sure sign that someone might be in more distress is a change in their behavior or functioning. So I'll give you an example of that. You have a coworker that used to come in, every day, on time, looks, presentable, looks put together, and then all of a sudden you notice that they're coming in late, or they look disheveled, or maybe they look like they just woke up. That's a sure indication that something is going on with someone. And in that case, it's important that we try to touch base with them. So, how do we cope with all this? So, it's important to keep in mind that trauma and stress really can when we experience these traumatic events, we can't say that they didn't exist. We can't say that there was no damage from them, regardless of what that was, whether it's the recent situations with these hurricanes or maybe some past trauma. We're never going to be able to say that that never existed. But what we can say is that it no longer controls our lives. So we don't want to give over that control. It's important that we take that control back by starting our healing process. And one of the ways I used to be, when I was doing therapy, a trauma therapist, and I dealt with a lot of people who had experienced all different kinds of trauma. And one of the first things that I always used to say to them is, be very careful about the language you use to describe yourself. Because when you use the word victim, you become a victim. But when you use the word survivor, you become a survivor. And I would say, you're here, you're in my office, you're talking to me. You came here, you drove yourself here, you know you need help. That makes you a survivor, not a victim. So always remember that even if you've been diagnosed with PTSD, it is not a sign of weakness. Rather, it is a proof of your strength because you have survived. You are here today. And whether you're functioning at your optimal or whether you're functioning at your lower, it doesn't matter. You are still here and you still survived. One of the most important things that we can do is talk about what's happening. So people will often say to me, how come when I have these traumatic events, or I've had a traumatic event, the symptoms didn't come out right away? They came out later. What I will say to them is, did you talk about it? No. So you didn't deal with it. It's not uncommon for our bodies to be able to handle it for a short amount of time or even longer periods of time. But then eventually it's going to come out, whether it comes out in physical illness or emotional illness. If we don't talk about trauma or traumatic events in our lives, then we are going to show at some point some trauma response. So I like this quote that anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of having these kinds of conversations. And that is that we may even be saying to ourselves, there's something wrong with me because this is what I'm experiencing. And 9 out of 10 times when we say what we're experiencing, somebody else will say, I felt that same way, or I feel that same way now. So it's very important that you recognize how important it is to talk about it, because an individual has a much higher chance of developing any kind of PTSD symptoms, because these symptoms can be delayed when they refuse to discuss what happened. The mind can only lie to itself for so long before the body holds the trauma. And this will come out in trauma and stress related symptoms, sometimes physical symptoms. So I'll give an example. I had a client years ago who had had a trauma in her. She had been sexually assaulted when she was younger. She was 12 when it happened. And she hadn't really, bothered her, at least she didn't think it had most of her life. She'd gone through life, she, become an adult, she got married, she had a child and was going along her day. And then her child turned 12 and everything changed. At that time, when her child turned 12, she started having significant trauma symptoms, and she had never dealt with it. And so when her daughter turned the same age as her, that's what triggered the fact that she hadn't dealt with it before. And so that was many, many, many years later. So PTSD symptoms can come out many years later, which is why it's so important that we deal with it now. Control is a big part whenever trauma does happen. When we think about these recent hurricanes, we had no control over this. We didn't know when it was coming. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. So we really felt out of control. So these types of incidents do create change that we don't choose. But healing is about creating the change that we do choose. So we choose to be better. We choose to heal. We choose to deal with what has happened. So, some quick tips, some quick coping tips on how to get through this. The most important thing that I can tell you is be kind to yourself. Give yourself grace. People if or do not realize that if something like this had happened to a friend, say you were living in a different state and you were not impacted by it, and your friend called you up and she was really, or he was really upset, saying that, his house or her house was ruined or whatever it may be, you would be kind to them. You would allow them grace. You would give them time. You would support them. You can do all that for yourself as well. It's very, very important that you be kind to yourself during this time. Try not to make any major life decisions. Just deal with what you need to deal with in order to get those pieces picked back up again so that you have those basic physiological and safety needs met. If I were to tell you, well, make sure you eat healthy all day, I think that would just create more stress, right? So, what I do say is try to eat one healthy meal a day, just one. That's all you really need. And that will make you feel better. And then it will motivate you to eat more healthy as you go along. But we're trying to do little steps here. Movement. Okay, I'm not telling you to go out and do an hour of high intensity exercise. What I'm saying is get up, move around, walk around. Even if you're in your office, stand up and move your arms. Jean Marie is famous for her movement snacks. Get up and move for 5 minutes. That's all. Just make sure that you're not sitting or sedentary for long periods of time. I can't stress enough how important it is to reach out to your support system. Having a good support system is the number one barrier to physical illness. And again, we've already talked about how our physical and our emotional are very, very much connected. Limiting alcohol use is important. We don't want to get ourselves caught up in drinking as a way to cope or using other drugs. It's very, very important that we make sure that we watch that. Hydration. Can't stress enough how important water is to your system. People who don't drink and become water and become dehydrated can end up in the hospital. So we get so busy, we forget that we need to get that water in us. Recognize that you may experience a variety of emotions, and that is okay. There's no wrong emotion. All emotions are right. If that's what we're experiencing in the moment, then that's what we're experiencing in the moment. Remember, it is okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not ask for help. So it's important that we allow ourselves to experience these emotions and we reach out to our support system to discuss them. Allow yourself to mourn the losses that you have experienced. Many of you will grieve the loss of life prior to these storms. Many of you will grieve the loss of your home or the loss of your belongings. It's okay to grieve that. It's important that we grieve that. If we don't grieve it, it will come out in other ways. Using our relaxation techniques. If we're going to practice breathing, make sure you're not breathing from your chest, but you're breathing from your abdomen. If you place your hands on your stomach and you breathe in, you inhale, fill that balloon up in your stomach. Imagine there's a balloon in your stomach and fill it up. And then as you exhale, you release it. Very important that we don't breathe from our chest. And finally, reach out for that professional support, professional help. If you find that you are in that realm where you are not coping, where you are in crisis, then it's very, very important that you reach out for professional help. Many of you have EAPs in your organizations. Please reach out and get some support, get set up with a therapist to help you cope and then work toward that healing. What if you or feel a need to support others? How do we do that? Very important that we don't touch other people without asking. We do not know what people's history is. And if we come up to somebody who's been in combat or who's been assaulted, we can re-traumatize them by touching them without them knowing it. So we want to ask if we ever want to comfort someone, we want to put our hand on their hand and we want to provide that support. We just say, "Would it be okay if I touched you right now to provide support?" And they will say yes or no. Um, Create a safe place for others. Allow you to be their safe place. Allow them to be able to talk to you and vent to you. That's how we create that safe place. There's no repercussion for you to be able to say what's on your mind. Show that caring and concern, and especially normalizing emotions. These are normal emotions to the abnormal situation. It is okay to have them, and it's understandable. And what happens if you feel somebody really should seek help, but they're just too overwhelmed? Maybe help them get help. Maybe even take them to that help. Um, Obviously, if you take somebody to see a therapist, you're not going to go in with them, but you can certainly drive them there and sit in the waiting room and provide that support to them. Because once they make it through that first session, they're more likely to be engaged. And then, of course, in providing that support to others, you need to take care of yourself. Just like being on that airplane, right? If the oxygen mask drops and you don't put it on yourself first because you're too busy helping others, you're going to pass out and you're not going to be there to be able to help others. So make sure that you take care of yourself, that you engage in those self-care techniques, and that you know when your boundaries are being hit, when you just can't do anymore, when it's time for you to say no. And it is okay to say no. We don't need an explanation. All we have to say is, at this point in time, I just cannot make that happen, or I just cannot do that. That's a good enough explanation. We don't need to tell people why we can't do certain things. But it's important that you take care of yourself. You will not be able to take care of anyone else if you don't. So now let's talk a little bit about moving into, moving away from the grieving and the loss and the sadness and the trauma response to what do we want to focus on? How do we want to move forward? Because right now, happiness and joy may be in very short supply. What we need to realize is that happiness is not based on our financial or physical well-being, even though we may think it is. Research shows that those individuals who have actually won the lottery were not significantly happier than who had been seriously injured in an accident. So it's not related to that. A component of happiness, believe it or not, is genetic. People don't realize that. But the other component, the bigger component, the main component, is determined by our attitudes and our actions. So, how do we work toward that? Again, acknowledge those difficult feelings. We have feelings and we're going to have feelings, and it's okay to acknowledge them. It's okay to have them. So, acknowledging those difficult feelings, allowing yourself to sit with them, working on reframing a situation more positively. I'm not saying that it's easy to do that because it's not. If you've lost your entire home, how easy is it to frame that positively? It's not. But we can take small pieces of it and we can find a positive aspect of it. Almost everything we go through does help us grow in some way and does help us move forward. We just have to find out what that is. But there are other situations that we certainly can reframe. So, well, taking a look at that, how can I reframe this? Experiencing gratitude for the good things that we do have, our family, our animals, love, hope, these are all things that we have, our jobs. There are good things that we have. So, really reminding ourselves to be grateful for those things and expressing kindness and generosity to others. I don't know how this feels like, what this feels like for you, but I certainly feel like my day has been made when I help someone else and they feel really good. And, when I express kindness to someone who's really having a difficult time, or when I can be generous to others. And then finally, cultivating that sense of humor. It's hard to find that right now, right? It's not easy to find our sense of humor with all of this. So we really have to work on cultivating that, finding it, bringing it back out again. But happiness is a longer term. It's a more lasting state of well-being and contentment. Okay, it lasts longer. But joy is a feeling of great pleasure that occurs for a moment in time, like a defined period of time. So I always tell people, find your moments of joy, find your pleasurable moments. So, how do we bring more joy into our lives during these difficult times? Ask yourself that question. How do we bring more joy into our lives during these difficult times? We need to think out of the box. We absolutely need to think out of the box. Ask yourself, what brings you moments of pleasure? Because your source of joy may look completely different than someone else's, and that is okay. So up on the screen there, I put some ideas of different ways that we can bring moments of joy into our lives during difficult times. So take a look at that, and I'm going to challenge you to pick at least one that you might be able to do in the next few weeks. One that's something that you don't normally do. And I'll give you an example. We were fortunate enough to get our electricity back, so a few days after the storm. So I decided that I was going to do the best that I could to bring some joy into all the stress in my family. And I went to Publix thinking I was going to have this, grand idea for dinner, which didn't quite work because they were out of everything. So I decided that pasta was the answer. So I made four different kinds of pasta, three different kinds of sauces, not by hand, by the way. And I set up a pasta bar at home and everybody had a chance to eat. And then afterwards, we played karaoke. We've never done that before. And you can do it on your phone or you can do it bigger if you have a karaoke machine, whatever works for you. And you can have some great fun. We had the best time. We did it for hours. Never expected that for sure. But it was fun and it was something we had never done before. So take a look at this list. I know some of you may not have your electricity back, your power back, and I'm sorry for that. But maybe there's something out here that you can still do. Dancing, yeah, we can play music on our phones. Any of you who are Grey's Anatomy fans, remember how Meredith and Christina would get stressed and they would just put some crazy music on and start dancing by themselves around the room? Well, that's a great stress outlet. Music, awesome. Walking, hiking, looking at fun pictures, building a fort, making paper airplanes, thinking out of the box again, coloring, sketching, doodling, animals. Animals are great therapeutic support. Karaoke, get lost in your favorite hobby. What is it that you really enjoy doing? Play board games or cards. Get some people together impromptu. Do something fun with the kids if you have kids, or watch a feel good movie. And I caution you, when things are down, don't choose those sad movies. Don't choose those thriller movies. Choose a feel good movie. Stretching, yoga, meditation. We talked about that before. Bubble baths, calling an old friend, reaching out to somebody you haven't talked to for a while. Make a vision board, skating, biking, maybe doing something that you wanted to do when you were a kid but never had the opportunity to do. And now that you're an adult, you can do it. We can be a kid for a few minutes or few hours a day, right? Watching old cartoons or old shows, connecting with nature, gardening, making your favorite recipe, or why not try a new recipe? Binge watch a favorite series in your PJs. If you have young kids, let them paint your nails or do your hair. Play with modeling clay or Play-Doh. When was the last time you ever played with Play-Doh? Read a children's book. Wear your favorite comfy clothes. Or declutter a little spot in your home and make it a therapeutic space, whatever it is that you like. So, those are just some ideas of some things that you might be able to do to bring a few moments of joy into your life. So, take a look at that. I am going to move forward to the questions and discussion, but if you'd like me to go back to this, if you're still looking at it, I'm happy to do that. And Jean Marie did put a question in the chat that I would love to have some answers to. And that is, what are you going to do this week to bring you joy in the next week? You can pick something on this list, or you can come up with something completely different, but I would love to know what you're going to do for yourself to bring you those moments of joy in the next week. Does anyone have any questions at this time? I'm going
I
to go
love
ahead and
seeing
look. Oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Jean
I love
Marie.
seeing all
Sorry.
the words coming in, and as you kind of go back and look at the chat, Dr. Moser, I'll just kind of read some of them out so people can kind of get some ideas and add theirs in as everyone's going, and let you kind of see if there's any questions you can address in the chat. But people are wanting to go sit outside, watch those Halloween movies, whether the scary ones or the fun, silly ones. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, or those are some of my favorites to see that. Spending time reading. Just being able to go to the grocery store and be able to get what you want from the grocery store. That's awesome. Spending time with family. I love the uniform costume. Playing games with your family. That was one of the things that even my kids were saying. It's having that downtime, not having the electronics, having to play a board game and getting that nice time together. It was great. Anything else you want to add or any other questions from the group? A lot
When
of
we
people
did our
loving their
family
pets.
when we did our family fun night, Jean Marie and others, we initially were going to do the board games, but then I couldn't find any of them, so that's why we opted for the karaoke.
We played Rummy Cube by candlelight.
Now, were there any questions?
I think most of what I saw were comments and people just saying, resonating with what you said. And I think that was one of the best things about this presentation is you did give this great information. You gave strategies, some of the things we knew, we need sleep. If you're not getting that sleep, you need to find out how to do that. If I'm not eating well. But it kind of reminded us to bring those to the forethought that we're not all going nuts because we're feeling stressed and not being able to remember things and having that survivor guilt. These are normal reactions to an abnormal situation, and you gave us permission to know that it's okay, but you gave us some strategies on how to take those steps forward through this time.